everyone, welcome to the APIC video series. Today I have three guests who are all doctoral candidates in school psychology programs, and they've all just finished the APIC process and are transitioning into their internships. So I want to have them introduce themselves to you now.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Campbell, and I'm a fifth year, transitioning to my sixth year, doctoral candidate at UW-Madison. And my internship will be at the East Family Guidance Center in Hilo, Hawaii. It's a community mental health center.
Hi, this is Dew. I'm also similar to all my colleagues here. I am transitioning to my sixth year and starting internship very soon with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We'll be at the autism track. Yes, and I also from the University of Houston in the school psych program.
Yes, so all of us are in sort of the same timeline. My name is Adriana Crossing, and I am a rising sixth year doctoral candidate in the PhD school psych program there. And I will soon be starting my internship at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School in the child clinical track.
All right, welcome back to the last video in our APIC series. Today we're going to be talking about the interview and matching process for APIC. I know for me, I wasn't aware that the internship process kind of followed what I understand to be similar to kind of like the med school matching process. So it's really interesting and very helpful to have this kind of information. So why don't we go ahead and start and talk a little bit about what the match process looks like.
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and start real quick and you guys can jump in. And so then let's start out with the amount of money that we will have to invest into the whole match process. But before that, let's talk a little bit more about the overall, because by the time that for us, it was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So then the amount of money may be different when the time that you guys started, okay? So for us, we did not have to travel because it was during 2020, there's no travel
for
interview at all. So then that amount of money is already taken care of for us. So we don't have to pay for those. However, the match registration overall, I think it was about $120, $150 for the match that you have to pay for the match process. It's a national matching service system that we have to pay for. So that's $100 something right off the bat baseline. And then depending on how many sites that you are applying for, that is like $30 something.
So the first one is about 60, and then like all the other ones up until 15 are 30 something.
Right.
And then if you apply to more than 15 sites, you're almost like financially penalized for doing so because then the application cost goes up. So if I'm not mistaken, I paid between $400 and $500 for all of my applications.
Mine too.
But who knows if it was all a blur. But,
yeah.
And then in cohorts before ours and possibly into the future, thousands of dollars have to be allotted for flights and hotel and boarding, car rentals, if that's how you have to get around the location you're in. So I know a lot of people that take out new credit cards or take out loans or tap into significant savings in order to do so. It is very cost prohibitive, unfortunately. And I think about me, I had 6 interviews, but you had 11? 9, sorry. Yeah. In my mind, it was all of them.
It was 25,000, just kidding.
So many interviews. So, I know some folks that choose to not go on all of their interviews or chose not to go on them because it was so cost prohibitive. But I also know someone who didn't match at all their first time around and they got 14 interviews the second time and went to every single one. So it depends on what your situation is.
It's also something where I think this past year in the pandemic, a lot of sites mentioned, I think in the interviews, they're like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Like this is more equitable. And so there is a chance that sites in the future are going to go that way, depending on kind of their vibe and what they value. But at least the types of sites I was looking at really care about trying to promote equity. And so I think they just saw that they can live that out by making some of these things more accessible. So hopefully it'll change in the future.
Right. But then just to say the basic amount is like $100 something already for the matching services. And then based on a number of sites, and I think for me it's about $500 something too. That's what's not counting the travel and the boarding and whatnot. So you kind of keep that in mind as you're going through this process.
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk, I think we're all going to sort of talk about some of these other considerations for the match. So there's some common advice, and it's not all super helpful. So in the previous video, I talked about how having a system for my reaches and safeties, this very quantitative system, trying to use that to predict a very qualitative process, wasn't the most logical. It has worked for some people, but it didn't end up working for me. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is considerations other than prestige. Like, yes, I am so blessed and so happy to have matched a really incredible site attached to a very prestigious institution, but I didn't do my rank order or my applications based on what type of school the academic health center was attached to or the caliber of faculty that come out of it. It was feel, and just amazingly, my interview day at the site with which I matched felt really good. And I remember before I even went on interviews, somebody jokingly said, well, you need to rank X site first because it's, you know, prestigious. And when it comes to moving across the country potentially for a place to make not much and give a lot of your hours and heart and soul, you don't want it to be just because of the name or because of the money or because of the, you want it to feel right. And so I didn't end up taking that advice. I had a different list at the time, and I think it was a little misguided, and I'm really glad that I went with what my heart was telling me to do. Anything, Steph, were you gonna say something?
I was just saying, like, yeah, so what Adriana was mentioning about it being so much more than prestige, or, you know, at the end, when it came down to it for me, I knew that many of the sites I interviewed at were going to be stellar training opportunities, right? And they had very different levels of like being well known or whatever, but just meeting with them and finding out what people's intentions are and the plans and how they do stuff, I was super confident that in like my top several sites, I was like, it's going to be great if I match at any of these. When it comes down to that, it's like, you really have to think about all those other things that goes into matching. And so for me, different things are ranked in different ways. And personally, I was going through some family health crises during the interview process. And so my dad got really sick. My whole family got COVID. There was like, I had COVID. And so there were all these things going on that were affecting also how I was thinking about making this move and making this transition to the next stage of life and training. And so for me, I knew that coming out of COVID time and coming out of these family health struggles, it was not going to be a great choice for me to go to a place where I knew I wouldn't have good work-life balance, like where there's a lot more pressure to work more hours than you should, or people are like, oh yeah, just take reports home. Like, that's a really normal thing to hear about. However, it's not what I felt I needed at this point in my life with the amount of stressors that were happening. And so I ended up really prioritizing like the balance I saw portrayed in the people I interviewed with and how the culture was around working and how much I felt like I could build a community there. Just because who I am as a person, I knew if I'm going to continue to go through some, you know, outside stressors with like family health or things like that, I wanted to be in a place where I would feel supported and be supported like very quickly and not feel totally overwhelmed by all of it going on. So that really changed how I, like, coming into the APPIC process, I had a very different mindset, I think. And then it came down to like really imagining my life for the next few years. My partner and I talked about what we valued and what I cared about, and with my friends as well. And it was just, it made it very clear and easier for me to think about how I want to live and how I want to finish out and start my career.
Yeah. One thing I also just want to add on to that is I've heard over and over again from established psychs and faculty is like, you can do anything for a year. No, you can't. I think that's advice that's very like in the, like, you know, no offense to the very well-intentioned individuals that give that sort of advice, but it just reminds me a little bit of the like hazing model of graduate school, which is you should do whatever it takes to get from point A to point B. I am a queer woman of color. I have 2 separate chronic illnesses that qualify me under the ADA. I do not want to go to a place that's not going to have a queer affirming or physician of color nearby. And I have several specialists that I have to follow. So I was looking at urban centers. I wasn't looking at rural communities because I didn't want to be driving an hour and a half to find healthcare for myself. And also I get really severe migraines that unfortunately are stress induced that came at the end of graduate school, really rough timing on that. But I cannot work at a site that is going to say that it's a 55-hour a week and then you're taking work home and working 60 to 70 hours, because my body has limitations. I physically cannot work those sorts of hours. I have to rest so that my body can stay in a healthy cycle and not get tons of migraines. So I just think it's really important to know that sometimes the folks giving that advice don't know all of your personal circumstances, and to honor those personal circumstances and values, and not just take advice just as it comes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. Didn't you like actually reach out to sites and look into their policies about like, you know, the valuable disabilities and all of that?
I did. I can actually dive right into that. So it's tough being someone with multiple chronic illnesses, and my second one actually happened during the APPIC process. These two lovely ladies know that I was hit with a 24-day severe migraine that would not break. And I almost didn't apply for APPIC in the fall because I almost wasn't able to get all the application materials in on time. And that migraine also impacted my clinical training, my coursework, my assistantship. I had to drop hours all over the place. And I got a lot of tender, loving care from supervisors that were very affirming and supportive. But what I realized is not every workplace is that way. And that's just the world we live in. We live in an ableist society, and the standards are not based around those of us with disabilities. And just the experiences that I've had over these last couple of years trying to navigate such an intense, rigorous training experience let me know I need what I got in the fall, that tender, loving care from supervisors. And so the APA has like tips on like when to disclose your disability, and we can link that below as well. It was shared with me by faculty in my program. I ignored that advice, and before rank day, I emailed the directors, the clinical directors of every single site I interviewed at, and said, hey, listen, I'm a student with a disability. What supports do you have available? I want to use this information in my ranking process. Because what I knew is that it was going to be not worth the hit on my soul to be at a place where I wasn't being affirmed and supported as just functioning as a psychologist with a disability. And luckily, every single director had the most amazing replies. They had like resources, they had links, they had examples, they were reaching out to other people if they weren't sure. One director emailed every single supervisor that I would potentially have if I matched there, and reported back to me that all 7 of them said they would be happy to support me as a clinician with a disability. So I'm really glad I didn't let an association tell me how to navigate my own journey with disability, turns out.
100%. And I'm so proud of Adriana and all the things she did during that process. Like, that takes so much bravery and courage. And I will also encourage this in terms of mental health. If I'm a person who has managed anxiety and depression, and
Retweet.
yeah, so it was important to me to feel like I would be at a place where I could talk about those things, where I knew that their attitude about self-maintenance and self-care were values that aligned with mine. And especially because it was such a stressful point of my year when I went through all these things, those things were really meaningful. And I actively had COVID during all my interviews. So that was something to think about. And I was scared to tell people that I was sick because I didn't want the stigma, of like, you're dumb, you got COVID somehow by being dumb, or you're Asian, you have COVID because you're Asian. So like, there's a lot of stigma that I was trying to avoid in those conversations. And I talked to my DCT and I was like, do I tell people? Like, I briefly thought I was going to lose my dad. And I was like, I might have to just randomly travel and go to a funeral. Like, I had a lot to think about in terms of what to disclose to people. And my DCT was like, I think you should tell people if you feel like it's going to, maybe impact you in this next week. Like, people should be understanding. And it really came down to like, yeah, I don't want to be in a place that wouldn't understand that. At the same time, my dad got a little better, and so I didn't have to disclose that. But it was a wild thing. And I don't think ranking as nearly as simple as, does this check my check boxes? Like, we decided to go to a place where we knew they wanted us to stay past internship, to do postdoc, to contribute to the community on the island and provide mental health services. So I know going in that we're going to be there for several years. We actually bought a house so we could do that. And so like, all these things, like, my whole life has changed, and what the next few years are going to look like based on, getting a vibe that I thought those people would support me. Like, being more settled in a place really made a difference for me. And a lot of people aren't there at the end of their grad school career. I'm a little older than a lot of my classmates, and so that made sense where I'm at.
Yeah. And I was going to say the exact same thing too, is that when I was going through the ranking process, it was exactly very much like that. I'm Asian American, and during the pandemic, you see the news, we were being attacked everywhere. And mostly that I tried not to even apply to places like New York, and I tried to apply to California, and I was very hard for me to rank them. And I just say that I want to go to places that when my family visit me, they'll say, because I don't want to see them in the news getting their brain punched out and die in the street, like we have seen the news in these 2 states, right? And so that was the factors that I was strongly high up there when I was ranking my site, because of my family's safety and my own safety as well, because the pandemic has put us a really big risk for just being Asian American walking down the American street. And then, I mean, those are the big factors, but also I'm thinking about like the vibes that was there and that during that interview. And there are places when I talk about specifically about Asian American experience was not being very open and receptive. Mm-hmm. I was like, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. And then there are places who are just like waiting and just listening, and just like not only from just the interview, but starting from the admin level. They're just so in tune with the political issues that go on in our country. Mm-hmm. And then from the admin person sending out email, highlighting things that were going on, to the interviews, to the thank you emails, and then their responses. It just, all of that really speaks to not just like, just a few hours of interacting with them, but also like the whole entire system that demonstrates the certain values that I value. And therefore, those are the sites get higher up in the ranking system. And then of course, there are other more realistic issues, like, can you live there for a whole year? Will they offer you postdoc? What kind of postdoc experience that you may get out of from that side? And in addition to the vibe that you get from the supervisor, the people interview you, and the other admin people that you interact with. And also really listening to and figure out the body language as you are interacting with the interns that are there. Yeah. Right? Asking the questions like, how are you, experiencing the site right now, and things like that. There are interns like, may talk about like, yeah, we do work a lot, but how are they saying, like, even though they overwork, but how do they feel for the people that are there? Yeah. Now that could influence the way we rank about that side too. So based on where your values are, but also see about the people that work there and see how they talk about the site. You can tell from the body language as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just yes. Like I said earlier, like where I ranked first, which is, I said it at the top, is that I'll be starting my internship at Mass General. It just felt different than some of the other ones. It was that connection that I had with people. So, let your heart guide you, maybe.
So my one additional thing about interviewing that I tried to do was have something. A lot of times people either ask you that vague question of like, who are you? Or how did you get here? Or whatever. Or they'll specifically asked for something memorable. And so I tried to have something ready that really reflected who I am as a person, but was also kind of memorable, kind of in my pocket, ready to go. And I somehow slipped it into every single interview I had. And that was that I play trombone in an activist marching band. And so people could remember that. And it's something random, but also like speaks to my values as a person who cares about social justice, that kind of thing, and loves music. And if you can think of something that you want to make sure you share, you can figure out a way to work it in, and something to keep you kind of memorable in their minds, or something that they can associate you with.
All right, and so the last thing that I'm going to have you talk about are your experiences with interviewing. What can you share from that?
So much coffee. No, except yes. There's so many different considerations with interviewing. I'm going to start by saying right now, I made a binder. I love a binder. I'm the Leslie Knope of school actually, most school psychologists have Leslie Knope energy. But anyway, so I went to like Staples and got a 2 or 3 inch binder. And in there, I had all of the brochures for all the sites I got an interview for. I had printouts of my own application packet. So my CV, my cover letters for everywhere I got an interview, my essays. And then also one thing we haven't talked about much throughout this series, but different sites require different permanent products. So somebody might want a psychoeducational report or a neuropsych report or a termination note. Another one wanted an intake note. Someone else wanted an intervention report. Not one site wanted all these things, but across my 15 sites, all of those things were necessary. And so I printed out all of those things as well, just to remind myself of what I submitted, so that if they had a question about the case, I could answer it. And I also printed out like case conceptualization papers and presentations that I had done, because there's nothing like being super overwhelmed and burned out from doing a ton of interviews back to back to help you forget that you're a psychologist. So I printed out basic case conceptualization work I had done in the past to just help keep me on track about my thinking, just because it is a very stressful and anxiety inducing process, but you want to still put your best foot forward as a psych in training. And so that's just sort of how I started. And I also, that binder is great because some sites will send you materials, some sites will send you your schedule, and you just have a one-stop shop place to take all of it. Those of you that are less interested in killing trees than I am, or who are very virtual, might want to create like a Google Drive folder or something like that. But as I mentioned before, I am a migraineur or a migraine sufferer. And so having things that aren't on a screen as a backup is really important, so that if I do get a headache, I can turn the lights down low and keep it moving. So that's sort of how I started. Do you have anything you want to add before we jump into the lovely little points we wrote down?
Yeah, sure. I guess similarly, I think that we both have like big, huge, like 3 or 3-inch binders to get everything together. So then I have a binder just to have all the products, as well as like, you know, the site menus and the extra information. I just put them all in there in that one tab. And so by the day that for interview, I just like whip out that particular package and then just like read through that the night before, just to get everything refreshed. I think that it would be nice if I were to go back, is that I would have a spreadsheet about what products that the site needs.
Yeah, for the application.
For the application part, yeah. What happened is that if some site will reach out to you, you forget a product, and then you submit it right away, but some site may not. And therefore, it's good to have like, because like site is asking for different things all over. There are sites that's not asking for anything besides your application, your CV things, you know, just typical things. But there are sites asking for like assessment report and the intervention report and intake notes. And you just, when you have like 10 plus site, things got a little confused. So then have that spreadsheet early, so that as soon as you submit that information for that site, click, 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 click. So keep an inventory of what you need to submit and what you have submitted. It will help you a lot. Yeah. And then basically review for that during interview as well. And then I think that we're gonna go for like specifically about the dialogue piece. And then
so one thing that we were talking about, Stephanie, I do know, and she might talk about this, or she may mention it while I was in the restroom, but talked about her activism music, which is something that she brought up in like all of her interviews. And I did something similar. Mine isn't as cool as being an activist marching band member, which is one of my favorite facts about her. But in addition to my psych training, I actually engaged in intergroup dialogue facilitation as well as social justice education, which it truly is completely separate from my psych work. And it all got started because I was doing that thing where I think my CV is not long enough and I start looking for stuff. So I got hired as a dialogue facilitator, but I stayed on with the project and became a trainer of facilitators and a facilitation lead, all those sorts of things. And then following that, got hired into social justice and diversity, equity, inclusion, and liberation consulting. And the sites that interviewed me, we talked about that a lot. And I talked about how it influences my psychological work, how my psychological work influences that, how I plan to bridge these two aspects of my professional work. And it's something that set me apart. Not a lot of psych students who also pick up a ton of clinical hours to hold on to part-time jobs quite like I did. So that was something that set me apart, and I was really excited to talk about. But I was very careful to tie those conversations back to psychology, back to why I was a good fit, back to my goals, because I wanted them to not see me as someone with too many diverse interests, but rather someone who was going to focus while I was at their site. And I'm really excited because MGH has dialogue and social justice education programming in their Department of Psychiatry. So it's a really good fit for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that I really like, one of the feedback was so interesting when I was like on one of the interview for the site. So depending on how the site structure the interview,
Mhm.
sometimes they will just like start out with a presentation of their like rotation or track right away. Take advantage of that and start writing things down.
Yeah.
They love to see that. Gosh, it's like,
oh yeah, just to see. I know it sounds wild, but like take notes, like visit, like take your notes.
yeah, basically take notes.
I
Like,
took 60 pages of notes
Yeah.
on my digital writing tablet during the APPIC process. It was horrifying.
yeah, me too. I took note because I have a brain of a goldfish, so nothing got through.
Me too.
So I was just like, and the whole time they're like, oh my gosh, we really appreciate you taking notes and writing things down. Like even when you answer a question, write some stuff down. It's supposed to be helping, processing whatnot. But to them, it shows that you are taking whatever that you're doing during that interview process very seriously. So that's one way that they can read the nonverbal piece, right?
Absolutely.
And then like there are times when you're talking about their information, and then like you can ask them questions. So what I'm trying to say is that keep the interview process very conversational, right? So then I would remember the feedback from this one other interview side was that they were talking about their values and they're introducing about their rotation. And then I immediately jumped in and was like, wow, that is so cool. I really like to do that more. And then I kind of like share with them one of the case that I had that I prepared. I was like, this is a good match for that time. Timing is right. Boom, jump in, tell them the case. They're like, cool beans, right? And then towards the very end, it's like, that was so cool because I have all this question. I didn't have to ask you. You actually provide me the stories already. This is so cool. I've never had this before. It's very conversational to a different level. And I was like, oh, because I did it because I don't want them to ask me questions. I just want to get it out of the way. But then I kind of like, and then I'm pretty sure they would ask me questions if I missed anything, but turned out I didn't miss anything. Talking about cases, I think that like everywhere we go, there are like resources telling us about like different kind of cases that we need to have, like ethical.
Yeah, have like an ethical dilemma, have an intervention case, have an assessment case, have a consultation case that you could describe and walk through in about 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, multicultural, multicultural and things like that. Nevertheless, think about it this way: there are cases that our cases are working with real human beings. It's very well routed, so one case can actually hit all of that points.
Absolutely.
Right, and then I want to say that not just talking about the outcomes, like, oh wait, great, we did it, they fine, bye. No, talk about the process and the outcome. But the process is so important about the site. The site wants to know how you process through it. What happened? Who are the people? What happened? What have you done? How can you do it differently? What are the growth that you have gotten? And what are more things that you actually want to do more with that case, I guess, that you share with them? And how even amplify the opportunity by saying like, what are some things that you can do more by being at this site? And then, because I want to say that one of the cases that was so hard for me because the site that I was at did not have the emergency. They cannot basically hospitalize the person when that person was so high at risk. So we basically had to ask parents to send them whatever. But anyways, and then I bring that up, and then I wish that there will be a bigger hospital site where that is possible. When I know for sure that my client will be next door at the hospital taken care of, and then that's the reason why I want to be at this place so that I can do that. And then they're like, oh, yeah, we can do that here. Yeah, for sure. We are the biggest hospital, blah, 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 things like that.
The largest children's hospital in the region.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, yeah, this is why I sign up here. So then bring it back to the site. Always bring it back to the site.
Yes. Oh, that's so brilliant. Just another case example. I had one that had an ethical dilemma, involved seeking a ton of supervision, but also was an incredibly successful case. And I think it was like a 7-month therapy case that also had some parent management, all that sort. This case had everything. Like Stefan from SNL voice. But I was so honest. I was like, this case was the first time I came across a lot of these things, and I saw a lot of consultation, did a lot of reading. But for me, the thing I really wish I had been able to bring was a family systems lens, which is just not something I had direct instruction in. And I noticed that this site had didactics in family systems therapy, and that they had supervision available in family systems from a social work perspective. So did the exact same thing you did, where I was like, what would have really ruled if I had this client while I was at your side. But I love what you said about like different cases having like all those different things in it, because that's what I ended up doing. Originally I was like, okay, I'll have an ethics case and but I ended up only having 2 prepared because they had everything.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I really have 1 to 2 cases that, but these are cases that we work with human being. Of course, they have all these like factors that are going on in their
Yes.
lives. So really talk about the process always, and also talk about like what can you do differently, and then what you want to grow out of it more. That is something that site really want to see. It's a growth mindset. Most sites want to see that growth mindset that you can bring to you during the interview.
Yes. Okay, we have talked so much about like the content, but what about, speaking of outcome versus process, prepping for interviews? Please practice. You think that you interview, no, until you have someone asking you like a classic psych question. And we actually have a couple of handouts with example interviewing questions, and we will send those to Brianna for her to link down below in the description box. But the questions are out there. Like the questions are out there. You don't have to just like guess. So have someone, even if it's your mom or your mentor or another parent, a sibling, whoever, your found family, whoever you've got, get them to sit across from you or get on Zoom or FaceTime or Facebook call or Instagram call. We have too many calling things these days, y'all. But actually be put on the spot, because you can read that question and think, I know that answer. And it's not until you're fumbling on your 7th consecutive minute of trying to say like, what makes you tick, that you realize you really need to work the kinks out. So like you've absolutely got to ask. And then make sure to have questions prepared for each site. Make sure first of all, they want to see that you're curious. Second of all, we talked about a lot of different considerations for ranking earlier. You're going to want to ask those, and they're going to know that you're serious, because you're like, okay, this stipend, how far does it go, and this cost of living, or what is the how are your interns? Are they okay? Like maybe ask a little bit more artfully than that, but like make sure that you're asking questions. I already mentioned the online resources for interview prep, but one thing, do you have anything else for interviewing? Because you know what I'm going to bring up next, which is thank you notes.
Yes. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So the last thing, and this is optional and a little controversial, thank you notes. Some people recommend sending a thank you note to every site. Some people recommend sending a thank you note to every person that interviewed you, including the graduate students you met with. I know someone who matched at I think they're one of their top sites, number 2 maybe. They didn't send a single thank you note. I sent 30 something of them. It was a lot. And all I'm saying is all those notes we were talking about, if you're taking a lot of notes during the interview, to make your life a whole lot easier, and you'll be able to do sort of like tailor-made, thank you notes. But not everyone is even going to reply. Not everyone is going to see them. And it was more to manage my own anxieties and something that I thought was really necessary to thrive. What about you? How did you feel about your thank you notes?
Oh my God, I spent forever. It's like writing a whole application itself. That's how long it was, because I took it so seriously.
And you had 9 interviews.
Yeah, and each of them has like other smaller interviews. So it's like 9 times, God, it's like 30 something almost. Thank you notes I have to write. There are like 3 different interviewers in there. So I was like, gosh, this is like so many that I have to write. But I think that for me personally, I think it's cool to write thank you note, just like, hey, thank you. I think it's just our personality. Like we're thankful people. So write a thank you note, thank you, and then consider me continuously and whatnot. I mean, some of the thank you note templates are within that red.
Have we talked about the red book yet? Is this how we're going to close out this series?
Yes. Well, yes, but then sorry. It's okay. We'll talk about that up to this point. But there are sites specifically set to me before. It's like, don't send us thank you notes. We know you guys are awesome already. So don't even bother to. And then there are sites who let's just say they're my sites who I say a thank you note to, never respond back. And I was like, tears just broke my heart. Well, I'm here. So just don't take those response on thank you notes as any meanings at all. I mean, if you want to do a thank you notes, that's cool. If you don't want to, that's okay too.
Especially for sites that interview like 60 to 80 candidates. Imagine you give 60 to 80 thank you notes on the span of a month. I wouldn't reply either. I'm not gonna lie. I would not. Or I'd put on an automatic reply that's just like, if you're an APPIC interviewee, you're welcome. So the last thing, but could be the first thing, is APAGS, which is the American Psychological Association graduate student part, right? APAGS. Did I get them all? APAGS. Yeah, APAGS.
APAGS.
Yes, has an amazing APIC guidebook. I don't know what the color is right now on the cover. It might be blue, it might be red, but it's basically just like your go-to guide for every part of this process. Basically, what we have done is to like personalize a lot of the information that's in this book, but I know both of us read a good chunk of it. And one of my favorite parts about it is it has example thank you notes, because there's some things you can say in the APIC process and there's some things you can't say to sites and vice versa. And so I used the language they use in thank you note to make sure that I was following the process in an ethical way and not saying like, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I want to go to your site. That's not a thing you can do. It's very inappropriate. It's unethical. But at the same time, you want to still show them that you're interested. This book has some good examples for that balance.
I want to thank all three of you again so much for doing this series with me. I know this process has been very confusing because I just don't know, what it is. And since you went through it so recently, I am so appreciative of you taking the time to kind of share your wisdom and your experiences with everyone. I think it will be very valued, and I could see people watching these videos for years, I think. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.